in our passage in Genesis 6 relative to Noah and the ark, the flood, are so foundational. In fact, the whole book of Genesis, I was just thinking as in my mind whirls sometimes, I was thinking as I was reading with him about Genesis 1 and how many, some of you have these center column references in my Bible, all in here. And they have the little superscript, above a phrase, and you'll follow it over here. Genesis 1 is just filled with them. Psalms, New Testament passages, and all that. And then in 2, and first sin, with 3, and Abel. And I was just thinking, as Farron was reading, how much of even Noah's mentioned elsewhere in the Old Testament, the prophets. And then in the New Testament, as we're in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. There are just so many parallels made that Genesis, the whole book, becomes so foundational in our understanding of the whole scheme of redemption. It's just a wonderful book to study. Does everyone have, I know these little handouts that I gave about the Herodian family that's from the New Bible Dictionary? I'm not getting any royalties by telling you. It's just a Bible dictionary. The first Bible dictionary I ever had, my grandmother got me. It was Smith's Bible Dictionary, got it from CEI, and it's an old work, but it was good, and I could see the value in Bible dictionaries. And since that time, we've had several, and then you can get Bible encyclopedias. But the New Bible Dictionary by J.D. Douglas, we bought, I think, in 1986 or 7, and it was a fairly new dictionary at the time. And you can still get it. I think you can get it as used, on eBay or something like that, Thrift Books, some of the online services. But it's really a great, and a lot of this, of course, you can get online now, but it's in a condensed way that I thought would be helpful. That's why I sent it. Now, real quickly, in our readings through 2 Chronicles, we're in the time period known as what in our readings? The divided kingdom. That's right. Solomon has died, and who was the rightful heir? Rehoboam. Yeah, if I can find 2 Chronicles here. Our readings tonight take us from really 13 through 27. We're just going to summarize. In chapter 13, in 12, Rehoboam does what? He faithful or unfaithful to God? He's unfaithful, that's right. He forsook the law of the Lord. That's in 12 verse 1. And then we have his death, and then he's followed by whom? Rehoboam, Abijah. His reign is mentioned, and after Rehoboam, Abijah, then Asa, chapter 14, and some of his wars. Asa was what kind of a king? Good, bad, indifferent? Extremely good, yes. Then after Asa, Jehoshaphat in 17, and then after Jehoshaphat, we've got several things happening with some prophets coming onto the scene, and then who follows him? Who? Yes, Joram. And then in chapter 20, 21, we have Moab and Ammon and some of the fighting going on. Edom revolts in chapter 21. And just kind of the ebb and flow of the history of the South primarily. And then Jehoram dies, and who follows him? Ahaziah. And then Ahaziah is followed by Joash. And then there's a woman involved there, who? Athaliah. And then Joash is spared. And then in chapter 24, he's 7 years old when he begins to reign, and he had a pretty good reign. Of course, that's a co-regency, but he reigned for how many years? 40. That's right. And what kind of a man was Joash? Extremely good. That's exactly right. Extremely good. And then in 25, Joash eventually is killed, and then who follows him? Amaziah. Good. And then Amaziah, what kind of man was he? Bad. And then he's followed by a pretty good guy, Uzziah. Yeah, pretty good guy. A lot of good things happen, but he is the one where he tried to offer what? Incense. And what was wrong with that? Wrong tribe. What was that, Brother Gene?
This doesn't pertain to thee.
Exactly. That passage, it does not pertain unto thee, O Uzziah. He was of the wrong tribe. It was not, much less family. It was of the tribe of Judah, the family of David, and only the priest could do that. And so the consequence of his disobedience was leprosy till he was 50 years old, right? Till the day he died, right? And then in 27, he's followed by Jotham, and then he's followed by Ahaz, and then in chapter 28 we have Ahaz reign, his war, and then he's followed by Hezekiah. All right. So we've got again the ebb and flow of Judah's history. Some good kings, but you'd have to say, kind of like the nation, for the most part they were what? They were wicked. And you have some bright spots that come. Asa is one, Hezekiah, Joash, but for the most part they're not. And it's like we've tried to say before, especially as Jeremiah mentions about Joash, that as the kings would maybe be up here spiritually, the nation might follow, but never usually rise to the height of some of the best kings. But then people like Manasseh and others who would just scrape the bottom of the barrel, the nation wouldn't usually dive to as low as they were. So, the reflection of the people is seen in the prophets. The reflection of the kings, or the history of the kings in the Kings, First and Second Kings, as well as the Chronicles. Okay, comment, question? Yes, sir, Josh.
Just real quick, I want to make a comment. It seems to me like regardless of whether or not the king was good or evil, 9 times out of 10, both of them would meet with some kind of terrible end or something that wouldn't make sense to some. Well, he was good, he did what was right inside the Lord, but whoops days, he messed up over here, and now he's laid up, dying of worms, or dying of leprosy, or he got killed because he made some kind of fatal flaw. And God didn't make any exception for that, despite everything else he did before.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think it's helpful for us to keep in mind that they were a nation, not a spiritual, though God wanted them to understand that, but they were a physical people, kind of like the United States and other nations. They had people who were lusting for power, would do anything to get it, do anything to maintain it. And so you're dealing, though God was working the seed promise through the southern kingdom and through the family of David, still you have a lot of, what's a good word, machinations, I guess, of people vying for power. Even with David, Joab was that way. He was opportunistic. And say even some of the better ones, that lust for power.
There's no nation on the face of this earth, it seems, never has been, never will, that is just in pristine condition, that has no level of, that has some level of corruption or complete corruption. And it's like, what can we do? People are saying right now, America is doomed because of all of our sins. Well, that's the way that the whole world is, always has been, always will be. And we don't know what's ahead of us, but we know what's in the Bible, what happened to those nations under God's judgment. So it's kind of some hope to me that here's the thing, whatever happens in the days ahead or whatever, it's just going to happen regardless of whether or not you have a gun or whether or not you a prepper, a doomsday prepper, it doesn't matter what you do, it's the best thing, preparation you can make is for eternity, because this mess is about to be done one way or another.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that, Josh. The wife said before, when things were going real bad politically here, well, it's been going bad a while, but she said, the more I see of the news, the more I want to read my Bible. And that just puts it straight to the point that our confidence is not in a wonderful president, a wonderful majority of the Senate or the House. It might help temporarily, but with certain things physically, nationally, but really our hope and trust have got to be in God. And really, through Isaiah, that was one of the themes of Isaiah, that they trusted in the Syrians or the Egyptians or everybody else, when God was telling them, if you don't turn around, I'm going to use these Assyrians. They're going to come in here, the rod of mine anger, the staff of my indignation. I'll use them, and they're trying to use all these other nations as allies, when God said, I want you to trust in the Holy One of Israel. And they wouldn't do it.
In 10 years' time, we might be meeting at some abandoned mine down at Maxine, Alabama. Who knows where we're going to be at, but we're going to have to continue to worship God no matter
Yeah,
what.
and I think again, there's some validity to that. We just need to pray and just trust the Lord that things will work out as well as they can, and then full speed ahead. If you think too far ahead of the game, it can be depressing. And just have confidence in God now that everything that we need, He'll take care of, and pray that, and who knows? I may have told you all this. I know we need to move on. There was a family member who was so concerned about if the inheritance of a mother would be divided equally because of a brother that they understood who was the executor of the estate, and the brother that they didn't think could be relied on. Well, and they were all up, worried about that. And guess what happens? The brother dies before the mother does. and so many things that we worry about never come to pass. All right, let's move on. We've come really to the very end of the Galilean ministry, and wanted to come back to where we've been. We remember the years of preparation, birth of John, Jesus, those 30 years, Luke 2, Matthew 1 and 2. The beginning ministry down in Jerusalem, and then that quick trip up to Cana, Capernaum, and back. And then he goes up north. John has been imprisoned over a little to the east of the Dead Sea in Macros, and he makes Capernaum his headquarters. You get something in your mind like that. It's hard to get out. He makes Capernaum headquarters for his Galilean work. Does a bunch of miracles, and we've been studying them. And now he's made another tour of Galilee. He's given the 12. He's called them and given them power, and he sends them out, which really the action of sending them is what is described in the word apostle. And so we talked about all of this Sunday morning. So now we've come down to the end here. Herod Antipas hears of Jesus' work and how Herod killed John. And John is over here, Jesus has been up in here, and so again, from extra biblical sources, this is where John had been imprisoned. This is one chart I've shown to show where Herod Antipas is, but I like this one better. And this is on what this is not what you see, but it's one I'm going to use. This, just to kind of refresh our minds real quickly. Here's Antipater and Herod the Great, who was the Herod who was on the scene when Jesus was born, and then the wise men came and said, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews?" And this is the one who did what? Killed all the baby males in Bethlehem. Right. Well, he was married to at least 5 women: Doris, Mariamne,
the second Mariamne, Malthusine, and Cleopatra of Jerusalem. And by these women, he had these people: Aristobulus, Herod Philip, Archelaus, or Herod the Ethnarch, Herod Antipas, and Philip over here, Antipater. He had all these various ones. Now, what's significant to our story are these, right? Herod Philip, Herod Antipas, and Aristobulus. Herod Philip is the one who actually has Herodias. And then, Herod Philip is married to Herodias. And it's through them that Salome, who is the girl who did what before? She danced before them, pleased Herod Antipas, who would have been her stepdaddy. So here, they're all half-brothers here. They're all half-brothers. Their father is Herod the Great, but they all had different what? Different mothers, and that made them half-brothers. And so Herodias now is the daughter of Aristobulus. And so her relation then to any of these would be her what? Her uncle. That's right. She was a niece to all of these fellows here. And so when you put it like that, Herod Antipas had two brothers named Philip. Here's Herod Antipas, and the Herod that John rebuked for having his brother's wife. And then here's Herod Philip, who was the one to whom Herodias was married. And here's another Philip over here that's not is significant in Luke 3 at the time when Jesus begins his work. He's known as the Tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis. Banished by his father, this Herod Philip lived with his wife Herodias and his daughter Salome. And when Herod Antipas visited, Herod Antipas would be his half-brother, and wooed Herodias away, took her for himself. And so that's the background on what John is condemning here. So here's Herodias, married originally to Herod Philip, and then Herod Antipas. So she is a niece to both, having been the daughter of Aristobulus, which is right here's Aristobulus. She was a daughter of Aristobulus, but married Herod Philip, had Salome by him, and then Herod Antipas woos her away from his half-brother. So does that make sense if you see the family tree there?
It don't look like a family tree at all. It looks more like a telephone pole.
Yeah. Well, that's all of these are sons of Herod the Great. And so she married him, and then Herod Antipas. And so the reasons that Herod's marriage is unlawful, really three. The husband of Herodias, who was Herod Philip, was still living when she was taken by Herod Antipas. And the lawful wife of Herod Antipas, who was the daughter of Aretas, that's not mentioned in Scripture, but the daughter of Aretas, who was king of Arabia, was still living. So you got two living spouses. And then Antipas, right here, to whom Herodias was married, Antipas and Herodias' relationship was uncle to niece. Well, that was outlawed by not the Romans, but the law, the Mosaic law. And hence their marriage was unlawful by reason of consanguinity. In Leviticus 18, you're not to marry your uncle, your aunt, those close relatives, as well as unlawful due to marriage to a brother's wife while the brother was still living. So it was unlawful for at least two reasons there. Does that make sense to everybody? I was talking to Lee about that this afternoon, showing her my charts, and she said, don't make it too complicated. Just say that they were, and I
What's
understand.
consanguinity mean, Bill?
What's that, buddy?
That word consanguinity, what does that mean?
Yeah, with blood.
Okay.
Yeah, in other words, anything sanguine has to do with blood, and con is with. So it's with a blood relative.
Okay.
So Salome, when you come down here, the daughter of Philip, that is Herodias and Herod Philip, daughter of Philip, Herod's brother, and by his, that is Herod Antipas' marriage to Herodias, Salome was both his niece and his stepdaughter. You know the old song, "I am my own grandpa." That's about how it is. But you can tell to me, the chart helps, the family tree helps, but that's why it was unlawful. So go back to where we were, and we'll get on into the reading here. But I wanted to do that for you, and hope that helps. Okay, let's do some reading now. And before we do, Mark has the longest account, the most exhaustive account. And let's look at Luke's first. Luke 9, verses 7 through 9. Brother Richard, if you would read that for us. Luke 9, 7 through 9. Then we're going to go to Matthew's account, which is a little more detailed, but not as long as Mark, and save Mark for the last. Luke 9, 7 through 9, brother. First, before you do, you want to make sure you keep a context in each of these books. What has Jesus just done in the first 6 verses? Yes, that is Luke's account of the limited commission, the first 6 verses of Luke 9. And now in 7 through 9, all of that that's described in Mark 6 is dispensed with in about 3 verses. Okay, Brother Richard?
Now Herod the Tetrarch heard of all that was done by him, and he was perplexed, because that it was said of some that John was risen from the dead, and of some that Elias had appeared, and of others that one of the old prophets was risen again. And Herod said, John have I beheaded, but who is this of whom I hear such things? And he desired to see him.
Yeah, okay, now this passage in Luke, basically, it's not so much about John as he just thinks, well, who's this Jesus I've been hearing all these rumors about? Who is he? Well, he must be John the Baptist, risen from the dead. But you got various ideas of who he was, and that's how it's related in Luke's account. Let's go back to Matthew 14 now. Matthew 14, 1 through 12. Sister Eleanor, if you would. Matthew 14, 1 through 12.
At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John, and bound him, and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude, because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John Baptist's head on a charger. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in a charger, and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it, and went and told Jesus.
Okay, if we were only studying Matthew's account, we have the parables in 13. In 14 and 15, you have a number of events that Matthew records as to different opinions as to who Jesus was. Herod thinks he's who? Verse 2. John the Baptist, risen from the dead. And then a little later in 13 through 21, when Jesus walks on water, they say, truly, the disciples say, and it's not in this one, but it's in Mark's account, truly this is the Son of God. Then later, in verse, it is in Matthew 14:33. And then when they bring people to him, he's the great physician, 34 and 35 and 6. The Pharisees, though, in chapter 15, think he's just a violator of their traditions. And, you just go, and so in 16 of Matthew, when they're in Caesarea Philippi, he records that Jesus asked them, Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? You remember? And John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And then he said, but whom do you say I am? That's when Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. So in Matthew is recording a number of those things, and that seems to be more of the emphasis of Matthew, but he does record, obviously, some of what Herod had done to John that takes John out of the picture. Let's go to Mark's account, Mark 6. This is the more exhaustive account of all three, a little longer, and we have a little more information. We've down in verse 14 through verse 29. Sister Billy, why don't you read 14 through 22, please. 14 through 22, and Brother Gene, 23 through the end, 29. Okay?
And King Herod heard of him, for his name was spread abroad, and he said that John the Baptist was risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves
Oh,
in him.
let me interrupt you. King Herod heard of his name. His name had become, who is the his? Jesus. Okay, good. All right, go ahead, sister.
Others said that it is Elijah, and others said that it is a prophet, or as one of the prophets. But when Herod heard, therefore, he said, it is John, whom I beheaded. He is risen from the dead. For Herod himself had sent forth and laid hold upon John, and bound him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. For John had said unto Herod, it is not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife. Therefore Herodias had a quarrel against him, and would have killed him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and an holy, and observed him. And when he heard him, he did many things, and heard him gladly. And when a convenient day was come, that Herod on his birthday had a supper to his lords, high captains, and chief estates of Galilee. And when the daughter of the said Herodias came in and danced and pleased Herod, and them that sat with him, the king said unto the damsel, ask of me whatsoever thou wilt, and I will give it thee.
Okay, so that was a wrong thing to say, wasn't it? And especially with the kind of people. You notice in verse 19, Herodias, American Standard says, set herself against him. And the King James, what you're saying, Sister Billy, had a quarrel. Had a quarrel.
Mine says held it against him.
Held it against him. Some of the newer translations say had a grudge or held a grudge against him. The English Standard says that, doesn't it, Kirsten? Verse 19.
Yeah, had a grudge against him.
Yeah. That idea of holding something in and ready to strike out is the idea. So there in psychological circles, sometimes that's called, when somebody's really aggravated, just waiting till the right time, passive aggressive. She's holding back until the right time, but she hated him. She hated him because he had said, what you've allowed yourself to get into is unlawful. I didn't mention this a moment ago. The Herods were originally or descendants from
They're from Idumea.
Idumea, the Edomites. That's right, the Edomites. And so they pledged a kind of a loyalty to the law. How loyal they were, it depends, not very. But they pledged that. And so being descendants of Esau, and of course the Edomites had a very stressed relation with Israel all through the years. But so the Jews looked at them as, you're keeping the same, or you ought to be keeping the same law as we are. So that's why when John would say, it's not lawful for thee to have her, he's not talking about Roman law, he's talking about Jewish law. And those were the reasons why, with the family relations, incest basically.
He was embarrassing.
What was that, Brother Farron?
He was embarrassing.
Oh yes, that was very embarrassing to Herod and Herodias.
She wanted revenge.
Exactly, she surely did. Okay, let's finish the paragraph, Brother Gene, 23 through the end there.
And he swore to her, whatever you ask of me, I will give it to you. up to the half of my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, What shall I ask for? And she said, The head of John the Baptist. Immediately she came in a hurry to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And although the king was very sorry, yet because of his oaths and because of his dinner guests, he was unwilling to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded him to bring back his head. And he went and had him beheaded in the prison, and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. And the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about this, they came and took away his body and laid it in a tomb.
All right, thank you. All right, so I don't have that many questions on, probably I need to revise this, but on the bottom of page 78, we do have a few, 3 questions with some subparts. Whom did Herod believe Jesus was? John the Baptist. It's interesting that John the Baptist, as we're reading, he's already been killed. And this is like a review. Well, now what about, who's this Jesus fellow? I hear all these miracles. And then you think, well, could it be John the Baptist, whom I killed, risen from the dead? And then he gives the details about, so it's like it's not being recorded when it happened, but after it happened, looking back. That makes sense to everybody? And but as far as how long, I don't know. But evidently not too long before this time, because in John 6, they come and it's almost like John's disciples are just now all in mass following Jesus. And in fact, they want to come and make him a what? A king. Take him by force and make him a king. But anyway, Herod had this misconception. Number 2, why might that have been even a thought if we note Mark 6, 14 through 20 and Herod's possible conscience about the matter, plus Luke 9. Herod is kind of an interesting contradiction of terms. He sought to hear John, didn't he? Did he not?
Yeah.
He sought to hear John. He was perplexed by some of the things he said. What else? In fact, he wanted to keep John alive, keep him safe. And who then is the one responsible? Well, that's a gimme question. Yeah, Herodias. We didn't say this. Well, we did earlier in our study. Remember, the angel announces to Zacharias that Elizabeth was going to have a son. And he will come in the spirit and the power of Elijah. The spirit and power of Elijah. All right, your shallow students is okay. Well, Elijah was a prophet, John's a prophet, and let's go on. This is one of those cases where you start thinking about the details, and the more you think, it's kind of a wow moment. Elijah prophesied during the days of what king? Ahab. And who was the power behind the throne of Ahab? Jezebel. Who said, if he's not dead tomorrow like those 400 prophets he killed, curse him by the gods? Who said that? Jezebel. Jezebel was the one after Elijah. Who's after John? Herodias. Yeah. And it's almost like Ahab was a rotten king, but it was not like the vindictiveness and the hatred that was stored up that Jezebel had. All right, Elijah preached in the wilderness, was fed by the ravens. John preached in the wilderness of Judea. Elijah over here preached to the establishment that you need to repent, or God's going to judge you. Same thing with John the Baptist. There's so many parallels. And what is to me so, the brevity. When the angel announced to Zacharias, he will come in the spirit and power of Elijah. That little phrase. And that's all he says. And then if you take that phrase and then you develop, well, what was Elijah? What about what he wore? What did Elijah wear? Yeah, a leather garment. He ate off the land. What was John's food locust and wild honey. He had a leather belt around him, you know. It's an austere character type. And so you have all of these parallels that come with John. John makes a wonderful study. All right, so let's go back to the question. What might have been even a thought about and Herod's possible conscience? He had heard all Jesus had done and wondered, sought to hear him, didn't he?
I think he was guilty, he felt guilty about having John beheaded too.
Yeah, he hated it. He didn't want that. Let's see. He knew he was a holy man. Yeah, that's down in verse 20. Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, kept him safe. Yeah, in other words, there was some modicum of thinking that, you know, this guy's he's a good guy. We don't need to kill him unnecessarily. And
Obviously, he believed in resurrection too, because he thought.
yeah, he did. That's a good point. That's a
It
good
doesn't
point.
make sense that he wouldn't not even heard of Jesus at that point, given some of the miracles that they already occurred.
Well, that and then his whole family would have known something about, you know, Jesus from Herod the Great, his father. They would have known. And it's interesting. I don't have this, or do I? Yeah. Where'd I put it? Here we go. Yeah, right here. Just follow this. This to me, this is just kind of really neat. All right, you got Herod the Great, and then Herod Antipas, or through Aristobulus, Herod Agrippa the first, who is the one responsible for James, the brother of John, being beheaded in Acts 12. And then he had Herod Agrippa the second, before whom Paul appeared in Acts 25 and Acts 26. And so when he said, "O King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest." And then Herod said, you remember, "With but little persuasion thou wouldest fain make me a Christian, or almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian." That was Herod Agrippa. He, no doubt, they had heard in the family circles about who Jesus was, or who they thought he was, or what the people were saying about who he was. And then you know, when Paul said, "This has not been done in a corner." Remember that statement? It hadn't been done in a corner. Oh, the king knows of him of whom I speak. So you've got Paul knew that they knew some things about all of this. Yes, sir. Okay. Did you have a hand up?
It seemed like that Herod wanted it to be John.
Yeah.
Don't want to do this because, you know, this guy that I beheaded, he's back alive.
He's back alive. I wish he were. I wish I hadn't done it. Yeah. All right. On number 3, Matthew 14:5 says Herod would have put him to death, yet Mark 6:20 indicates that he had tried to keep him safe. Who was actually working to have John killed? Herodias. What was Herod's estimate of John? Well, David mentioned that. He feared him and knew he was what? Righteous, holy man, tried to keep him safe. What did John's disciples do after his death?
They took his body and laid it in the tomb.
Was that with or without his head?
Well, it had to have been without his head. Yeah.
I guess she would have given it up.
Yeah, I read, and you know, you don't know what about this is true. Some scholars try to go on, you know, extra biblical history as much as they can. But I read that there in the castle in Machaerus, which was kind of in a deserted area on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, that executed prisoners' bodies would just be, especially beheaded, would just be thrown over the wall. And what would happen then, who knows? If that were the case, then the disciples would have gotten it.
Herodias had his head last.
Ma'am?
Herodias had his head
Yeah,
last.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's
So I would
reminiscent
take.
of Saul.
What was that?
I said, reminiscent of Saul's, the people who were loyal to Saul, and they took custody of his body. And
Yes,
his son's
yeah.
body.
Yes, when he was when the Philistines had him. That's true. That's
Hang
true.
on the wall, didn't
I'm sorry. What was
he?
it?
Didn't he hang on the wall?
Saul did. Yeah, they did with Saul. Yeah, Saul. In 1 Samuel 31.
Nailed it to the wall.
Yes. Yeah. And then some of the
people came and tried to, you know.
Wasn't it in the temple or something that they nailed it to the
No,
wall?
it was I know you got me on that. 1 Samuel 31 is where it is. It was a city wall, but it's not Bethshan. It was-
Probably had something to do with their gods.
They put it outside the city.
Well, I was right. 31:10, they put his armor in the house of Ashtoreth, and you're right, David, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead, that was a city I couldn't remember, Jabesh Gilead heard concerning him that which the Philistines had done, all the valiant men arose and went all night, took the body of Saul, the bodies of his sons, from the wall of Bethshan, and came to Jabesh and burnt them there, and took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted
But
7
in
days.
those cases, they never recovered the head.
No. All right. Comment or question on John or any of this? There are a lot of valuable lessons. I've used what Salome did. Salome is not mentioned and so far as her name is concerned, but extra biblical history, all of it indicates that's who we're talking about. She danced. I've used this passage before in lessons on dancing. She danced and it pleased Herod. Wonder how. What kind of a dance would that have been? Yeah, very sensual, extremely sensual. And you can do some reading on the kinds of Eastern dances that would basically mimic the sex act itself. And this would, not much different from what you see on.
This is his stepdaughter.
And this is his stepdaughter. Yes, exactly.
But it was a feast.
And his niece.
And his niece.
Yeah.
It was a feast and they were drinking too, so.
Yes. So you have all kinds of problems going on.
Secular history says that her and Herodias died when Mount Vesuvius erupted. That they were in Pompeii or somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
or somewhere near Mount Vesuvius when it erupted, and they were killed by that eruption.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Okay. Anybody else? Appreciate the good comments. Lord willing, we'll start with the periods of retirement. There are about 4 of them. It's a little briefer time than what we spent in the Galilean ministry. And we're about a year, best we can tell, about a year before Jesus is crucified, based on John 6. Okay, comment, question? All right. We'll stop.